Alright, hello and welcome. Today I'll be covering Aristotle's theory of the state. This is the second part of a two-part series on how the state forms and what its purpose is. So starting with the central idea, the family is the starting point of the state. The family itself is like a kind of miniature state, and it grows into a much larger extended family, which actually becomes the state. So starting with the family, no individual actually is responsible for the state, and every individual that exists came into a family in the first place. They were born from two people that had already had some sort of social arrangement, and each one of those parents themselves is born of two people, and so on and so forth, right? So every individual person naturally comes from a large group of people that already existed. In this way, biology necessitates cooperation. And in nature, there is no individualism. This is contrasted with Rousseau's state of nature, right? That we talked about in the previous episode. In his theory, he places the individual at the center of social interaction, and all forms of cooperation between individuals is meant to just serve their individual interests. So this point about how families then grow into larger groups that then cooperate and make sure that more smaller families can develop, this is actually how tribes, clans, and eventually nations form at different scales. Once a new individual family forms, they themselves come from a larger extended family, and then they marry into other extended families. They form alliances, and obviously tribes, and eventually these larger confederations, and we see these throughout all of history. Nations themselves are anthropologically real, despite what some thinkers in sociology, modern sociology, might say. Aristotle himself referred to small villages and towns as being, I think he used the term cousins of cousins. It's kind of an interesting way to think about it, that these groups aren't just an assortment of individuals, but rather individuals with close connections to each other, both cultural and biological. So going off of the concept that before every individual there's somehow already a group, this can be expressed in a simple phrase, taking after the kind of logical language that Aristotle uses. The whole comes before its parts. The whole is somehow prior to its parts, right? You can think about that as a cell dividing or a zygote dividing into multiple cells that then denote distinct functions in the body. So this ethical and political theory then puts the group as being primary rather than the individual. Another way to think about it in linguistics is that language shapes the thoughts of individuals. It creates a framework for their thoughts, but language itself is developed by groups and exists for communication between individuals within the group. Everything is like this. Biology is like this. Your individual genome comes from your parents. Cultural traditions that form your individual identity. Pretty much everything under the sun. Everything authentic to you was something that you inherited. It's something that you cannot choose or break away from. It's something that, in fact, chooses you. You're selected for its purposes, just like individual cells within the organism. So I'm going to go on a metaphysical side tangent here, just like I did in the previous episode relating materialism to liberalism. Similarly, the Aristotelian familial theory of the state can be likened to the theory of forms. If you think about a particular object, you can analyze it by talking about the atoms that comprise it, but that's not how the object itself appears to us. It doesn't appear to us as distinct parts made up of millions of atoms. It appears to us as an integrated, fully distinct, unified object from other objects. The collection of atoms that comprise it are really insignificant, and it is the character, it is the form and essence of particular objects that determine how that object functions in nature, not necessarily the protons, electrons, and neutrons. Maybe the form of the object might determine what kinds of atoms exist within it, but fundamentally, the atoms in the air surrounding my body are heavily interconnected with the atoms in my body, but I'm not defined by oxygen atoms surrounding myself, nor am I really defined by the iron atoms in my blood, or any number of things, the calcium atoms in my bones. I can't be reduced to any one of these things. I'm actually the form of a person. And that's what determines my unique function in space and time. So relating this to the family, it's actually the collective that determines how the individuals act. The form is prior to its material parts, and it is the purpose of the form that reveals its form in nature. So the purpose of the collective reveals its distinct form as a family or a nation or a state, tribe, small group, whatever. But its distinct purpose reveals its distinct form, just like the distinct purpose of each individual reveals its form. It reveals what makes it distinct from other objects. So another kind of metaphysical slogan to help you conceptualize justice in the state is what's good for the whole is good for its parts. So if we turned this on its head, we reversed this equation, this phrase would kind of become incoherent. What's good for the parts is good for the whole. You can imagine a society where some of its parts, some classes of people, are harming others for their benefit, their gain. So this is not justice. It can only be how I phrased it on this slide. It can only be what's good for the whole is good for the parts. What's good for the whole of the body is good for the individual parts of the body. You can't say the man is healthy if he has a heart condition. You can't say that the man is healthy if he's obese, but he just happens to have large biceps or a good brain. You have to say that the man is healthy if all of his parts not just are doing what's best for the individual parts, but also playing their role in making the whole body perfect. So this is justice in a human society, as well as within ecosystems and within individual organisms themselves. So this is harmony, this is balance, this is justice, going back to the concept that the whole exists prior to the parts. The whole of the universe, or zygotes, or anything really, they create distinctions within themselves because the parts play distinct roles for the benefit of the whole. Individuals have distinct purposes as distinct bodies, distinct personalities, that ultimately, when they flourish, their true flourishing is also what's good for the state, or the nation, the collective, right? And this is true with every structure and every form, and ultimately, the totality of reality has this kind of harmony. And this can be seen as natural law. Alright, so relating this explicitly to the state, the purpose of the state, then, is to create legal distinctions for each part of society that is naturally distinct, allowing these interests an amount of dignity and resources to perform their specific function for the good of the body. This includes private individuals, as well as collective organizations, social movements, economic classes, subcultures, all need to be integrated into a larger political harmony. This is the guild system in the Middle Ages. This is clans within many traditional societies, different tribes within certain confederations like the Swabian Confederacy. There are many examples of this kind of organic state. Moral wisdom makes a man good. An institution is not made good solely by being occupied by good men, but by the system itself, working in unison with its constituent parts. Like a ship, the state requires that its individual members hold virtue to the extent that they may perform specific tasks laid out in front of them, but not necessarily the virtue to choose right from wrong. One can imagine a kind of virtue is most needed in the task of leadership, judicial, executive, and legislative. So this obviously has parallels to Plato with the analogy of the state to a ship, and the wise man being the captain of the ship. So the purpose of the state is to bring up virtue in the citizens by creating surplus and self-sufficiency on a societal scale, in order that some may dedicate their life to the cultivation of virtue, broadly speaking. Virtue is needed in order to perform one specific task in the state, but the virtue of the state itself is to uplift the individual morally and economically. The life of the individual belongs to the whole by birth, right? So this is the family, settlement, and the state, and is made complete in its development by its interaction with said whole. Investment makes the good citizen. So in order to be a good citizen, one must know what it's like to be ruled and to rule by serving in office for a time and by serving under the command of someone else. A ruler must know what it is to be ruled. So this means that when you are born, you're born into a specific place, to a specific family, you are under their care, and you owe them a certain amount of obedience. There's an emotional investment in this. Then one works, fights, and builds up a group within their society. They learn responsibility and caring for each other, putting their life on the line for each other, sacrificing time, money, effort to the group. And through this responsibility to the group, they then can put this to the test in political authority. Then they hold office. This is the necessary sequence of events for Aristotle. He believes that this is how the citizen earns his place among his peers, by actually doing what it takes to build a high-trust society and take responsibility for the group, and they can reap the benefits of said group, and they can take part in its management because they learned this responsibility by raising a family and building a business, investing in the community. They then build the qualities necessary to help provide input in how the group should operate. I will be covering more about Aristotle's ethics and Plato's ethics, as well as many political theories in the future. But for now, thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Take care.